Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm going to pass it over to Tracy from Cowan so she can do the introduction.
Good morning and welcome to the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce September Business Growth Series, sponsored by Cowan Insurance Group. Cowan is a proud partner of the Cambridge Chamber to provide Cambridge members and their employees with preferred pricing for all of their home and auto insurance needs. I'm Tracy Sparks, Senior Manager, Personal Insurance and Private Client Business Development at Cowan, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to 7 Skills of Effective Communication. Over the past 18 months, we've all had to make adjustments in how we work, conduct business, and many of us are adopting new methods of staying connected with our colleagues and teams. There's no doubt that strong communication is more essential than ever. In today's seminar, we'll learn how to harness the power of emotional intelligence to make us more effective communicators and leaders with practical skills that will help communicate more effectively with our teams. I'd like to welcome our facilitator and speaker, Murray Smith, President and owner of Blue Canoe Consulting. Murray helps people and organizations improve by clarifying vision, developing strategy, and training leaders to enable growth and success. The name Blue Canoe Consulting reminds us that business success, like backcountry canoe tripping, is contingent on good planning, competent leadership, effective execution, and the ability to respond to unexpected challenges. In addition to his consulting work, Murray is a part-time faculty member at Conestoga College's School of Business, where he teaches business strategy, leadership, and organizational behavior to Canada's future business leaders. Now, with that, I'll turn it over to Murray to lead us through this important session.
Thank you, Tracy. I'll just take a moment here and share my screen. The joys of technology mean that we have these little interludes as well. All right. Well, as Tracy mentioned, my company is called Blue Canoe Consulting. People often ask me where I got that name. Well, I have a canoe and it happens to be blue. And I really do enjoy backcountry canoe tripping. So those things came together and hence the name Blue Canoe Consulting. Today, we are recording this presentation and it will be available on the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce YouTube channel probably next week. The platform that we're using will facilitate some question and answer. Melissa can set this up, or there's a chat box somewhere there for you to put in your questions, or at the end, we can open up for voice questions if you wish to have questions. And the slides that I'm using here will be available to you if you wish to have them. Now, I'm often invited into business settings to do coaching and training. And often when I'm invited in, the invitation comes because of a perceived communication problem. The business owner or the leader will say to me, Murray, can you help us with our communication? We have communication problems. Can you do some training? And of course, I can do that, but I will often say to them, that's probably not the root of your problem. And they look at me like I've got 3 heads, because clearly the communication is a problem. And it is, of course. Quite often what's happening is that they are perceiving a communication issue. And what comes to mind is this quote from the 1967 movie, Cool Hand Luke. What we've got here is failure to communicate. Now, this movie was made a long time ago, so many of you may not have seen it. It's a classic. It's a great film, and it stars Paul Newman, who you see in the movie poster here as the titular character, Luke. Luke was convicted of a minor crime in Florida and sentenced to 2 years of hard labor on a Florida chain gang. Now, it's an unjust punishment for a small crime, and he doesn't cooperate very much. In fact, he's trying to escape, trying to not have to serve his time. And for that, he gets beaten by the captain of the chain gang, who justifies the beating by saying it's a failure to communicate. What the captain is really saying is, you're not listening and obeying. The communication problem is all yours, Luke, because you're not doing what you're told. And quite often, when I'm invited to come in to talk to people about communication, the communication problem really is this failure to communicate. Not that the information is not available, but the expectation of obedience, compliance, of do what I tell you. And that's not really communication. Another curious thing that I can mention to you is when we do employee engagement surveys, whether I administer them or whether I look at employee engagement surveys that are done in other settings or by other service providers, among the lowest scores, almost without question, among the lowest scores on employee engagement deal with communication within the organization. Now, the company can have a very high engagement score, but the communication score is going to be statistically significantly lower. The delta between their average score on that engagement survey and the score related to communication issues, there's always a gap. And why is that? That doesn't make sense. It's an excellent company, and yet there's this gap in communication. Especially why is that when we have more tools available to us today to communicate? We all carry a communication device with us at all times. We sit in front of communication devices, a number of them, phones, computers, we have email, we have instant message, we have more communication tools for rapid communication than we have ever had. So communication problems within organizations have less to do with the tools and channels of communication than they have to do about the interpersonal nature of communication, about the psychology of communication, and the sense that those in the communication interaction are being heard and seen and valued. So failure to communicate is not so much about the one receiving the message, but about how we deliver the message or how we ensure that we engage the person or people to whom the message is intended in the communication process. Think about that again. The failure to communicate is mostly a failure by the one delivering the message and a failure to listen and engage with those involved in the communication process. And the promotional literature or the promotional blurb on the Chamber website for this seminar, it said in part, quote, effective communicators listen more than they speak. They ask questions to engage rather than interrogate, and they reflect on information more than they expound. Now, that's wonderful philosophy, and it's harder to do than it looks and sounds, because we tend as human beings, when we're in a conversation with people, when we're in an interaction, we tend to focus on formulating our response to the information that we are hearing. We are formulated to solve the problem that we hear about rather than to fully listen to what people say. Think about the last time you were in a conversation with someone, how many times you were thinking about the brilliant response to that information that you just heard, even though there's more going on. And quite often we're responding not to the root information that was sent to, that was meant to be for us. As human beings, we will set things up and maybe even bury the most important part of the issue being communicated far down the sentence or far down the discussion. And yet, as the listener, as the other person in this, we're responding to the first thing we heard. And that's our natural instincts. We also have this challenge of communication when we are in leadership roles. And this also includes parenting too, that we are programmed to be experts. You received your promotion because you were good at the job you were doing. You have expertise, and we are programmed as experts to solve problems. And that problem-solving instinct has us jumping into telling people what to do to solve their problems, which we are probably absolutely right and correct on that problem solving. But it brings back the question of what is communication. Sometimes communication is about identifying a problem, quickly solving it. But more often than not, communication is a tool that we have to learn about root problems, peel back the layers of the onion, if you will, to get to the root. And once we know what that root issue is that's being presented to us, then our communication opportunities to teach, to train, and to develop the abilities and talents of other people. So being a great communicator begins with becoming a great listener. So here are the objectives for this presentation on 7 simple skills for effective communication. As a result of this, and it's going to take more than just this one seminar, but I hope that the ideas that I'm able to convey to you today will set you on a journey to strengthen your leadership influence, even if you're not in a formal leadership role, but to strengthen your leadership influence with other people around you, whether it's in business and families and community organizations. This ability to listen and to communicate well will strengthen your influence. That some of the skills that I present to you today will help you enhance your listening communication skills. And as noted before, this is not a natural position for those who have an inclination or a natural instinct to be a problem solver, like I am. And the next one is to deepen your commitment and engagement with others, whether that is your teams, the people that report to you, managing up to your bosses, or within your families or other centers of social influence. So those are our learning objectives today. We're going to start with a poll. I'm just going to have you some general questions. And Melissa, if you could pull up poll number 1, we'll go there. And pick one of these things on your perception of how you communicate now. So when you're in a communication situation with people, you listen enough to get the gist of the message and then offer your advice, or listen carefully to know what to say next, such as solving a problem or giving a counter argument? Or do you pay attention and give listening cues like head nods and verbal cues along the way? Listen carefully and ask some clarifying questions? Or do you use empathy, listen with empathy, and deepen your understanding? Okay. So Melissa, I think that's probably enough time.
Murray, can you see the results on your end?
I can see the stop share. Should I do that?
Yeah, I can take it down if you'd like.
Okay. So you can see the poll outcome. About half of you are in that middle question, paying attention and giving listening cues and head nods. And then the rest are spread out on the top and the bottom of that. Now, this is just an awareness question of where you perceive yourself to be. There isn't particularly a right or a wrong answer here, although that last line of listening with empathy and asking questions is where we're going in this conversation. Where 47% of you we're giving the visual cues, you'll still want to do that. When we are conversing with people, there are some messages that we sometimes unintentionally give. And here are some of them. These we could call blind spots in our communication. We don't usually intend to give some of these impressions, but we can give them anyway, especially in stressful situations when we're really not as focused on the conversation as we ought to be. So perhaps the impression we give with an answer or our how we are perceived to be engaged or not engaged with the conversation is, I'm right. Tell me whatever you want, but I'm right, and just do what I tell you to do. Or I have the best ideas. Sometimes we can convey a message intentionally or unintentionally that we don't have time for this question, or that the person asking, why? Just trust me. I know more than you do. You don't know as much as I do. You're in my way, or Maybe I don't want to hear what you have to say. Number 6, I can wear down your objections and I can win. Number 7, I can persuade you in many ways with manipulation and coercion to get my way. Now, I'll give you some examples of this. We often send these messages that we don't need. In one case, I was working with a manager in an engineering firm, and he told me a story about being approached by one of his designers and asking about a detail in the building project. And his answer was, "I don't care, you decide." Now, did he not care? Of course he cared. Was it the other person's role to make that decision? Probably, yes, it was. It was within the scope of work of assignment of the person asking the question. But that begs the question, why was the question being asked? And that's what the manager recognized he failed to do. He failed to find out what the root behind that question was, because obviously now in hindsight, there was some reason why the person reporting to him could not make the decision or did not feel confident to make the decision. And so she was coming to him to ask. But he said, "I don't care." Now, of course he cared. Of course he cared. But that "I don't care" came out of a place of stress. He was very busy. It's "don't bother me. You make the decision." But the message he gave was not a message of confidence or of support for the individual's ability to make the decision. It was a "don't bother me" message. Here's another one. In one of my students at Conestoga College was on a co-op term before coming into my class, and we were talking about leadership and management, and he told the story about being on this co-op term, having a supervisory role in a factory. So a great opportunity for a young college student to be supervising in a very small and narrow way some element of production. But he's a student, and so he didn't know a whole lot of things, and occasionally he made errors. Not anything that was too huge, but errors. And so when he went to his boss to try to learn, the only answer he was really given, according to the student, was, "Well, you just need to own your experience." Well, what does that mean? And for the young individual, what he was looking for was an opportunity to own that experience through learning and growth and development. But what was the message that he was getting from his supervisor, who simply said, "You just need to own the experience," and did not give any additional training or development? "I don't have time for you," was kind of the message. How about times where we roll our eyes at people? I'm guilty of that. Or we have some other body language expression that says, "I've heard this before," or "That's a stupid question," or "Why do you always ask me these things?" Or how about when we've been training somebody and they ask a question that maybe you trained them on yesterday or the day before, and the response is out of frustration, "You should know this. We talked about this yesterday," or "We talked about this last week." And why don't they know it? Well, because you talked about it yesterday and it's been forgotten today because it hasn't been applied yet. And so we give these impressions often unintentionally because we're human beings, and because communication, effective communication, actually takes emotional intelligence and conscious practice and awareness of how we tend to show up, especially in more difficult or stressful situations. Now, I want to pause here for a moment and make a distinction between this kind of communication in a workplace or in a critical family situation where our job really is to listen and to ask questions, compared to you're out for the evening with friends sitting around a dinner table, or you're at the cottage around the campfire, or you're with friends at a bar or at some sort of social event, and you're just chattering away and having a wonderful time talking and comparing stories and really competing with each other for a moment in the spotlight as that spotlight bounces around from person to person. And we finished that event thinking it was a wonderful conversation because we were having so much fun together and we were sharing stories with each other. Well, that kind of communication in that setting is quite appropriate, but those skills don't work as well in a critical conversation setting. We shouldn't be competing for the spotlight. We should be competing to give that spotlight to the person that is engaging us in that conversation, especially if there's an opportunity to train or grow an individual. So if you look at the first 5 that I've listed here, they tend to show disrespect, neglect, or arrogance. Those are the messages that we unintentionally give. And 6 and 7 tend to demonstrate more aggressive tendencies in bullying or other negative behaviors. And, have you ever felt any of this from somebody that you were speaking with, perhaps someone in an authority position with you? Have you ever, if you reflect, have you ever been guilty of any of these behaviors in communication? I know I have. And the challenge with this is that these behaviors usually are blind to us. They're obvious if someone else points them out, but in the heat of the moment, they can be blind to us. These are our blind spots. And we're going to address those a bit in one of the 7 skills that we'll be looking at. Why is this important? Well, if you are in a leadership role, whether it's formal or informal leadership role, your success as leadership is communication. As this quote says, communication is the real work of leadership. We've now been through 18 months of COVID protocols and lockdowns and so on. And I had a conversation with a client a year ago. Hard to believe that a year ago it was August and we were about 6 months into the pandemic. And as I was speaking with this business owner who ran a business with about 50 people that was able to continue to function, was able to work remotely. It's a professional services company. He said to me, "Murray, I'm exhausted." Well, how come? I asked. And he said, "I have never spent so much work on communication as I have over the last 6 months." And that was an important truth that he was revealing about the importance of communication in his leadership. Now, in the office setting, the communication was much more natural. People could walk by his office. He could walk through the office and talk to people, and very approachable. But in the reality of remote business operations, he had to be very deliberate in his communication with everybody in the office and in ensuring that the changes and the stresses that were being created by our COVID lockdown situation was being mitigated with good and strong supportive communication. Now, his business has grown over the last 18 months, and they've added a net of 10 people. So they grew from about 40 at the beginning to about 50 now. And I would attribute that in part to the communication skill of this business owner and the other members of the executive team. Now, why is this so important? Well, whether you have formal leadership or informal leadership, communication is the lever to create influence. And leadership is defined as being able to influence people to move in the direction of the mission of the company. That's one definition of leaders. And so as leaders share their leadership through communication and delegation and training, you are able to gain the commitment of your followers who are willing to be influenced. And this then translates into engagement and empowerment within the workplace. I've got a graphic here to demonstrate why this is important. We talk about having safe workspaces, psychologically safe workspaces, as well as the traditional health and safety of the physical safety in the workspace. But if you have a psychologically safe workspace, that will support people to become intrinsically more motivated, which leads to engagement and empowerment. That will strengthen communication, but communication also is the foundation, or one of the key pieces to create this safe space outcome. And it becomes a self-reinforcing cycle of greater communication, which leads to more respect among people. And people feel valued personally, feel heard, and therefore feel more safe, which leads to a pursuit of improvement rather than of protection of status quo or of my territory. It enables people to take appropriate risks, knowing that they can go and communicate, ask questions, and seek support. It opens up the opportunity to voice opinions and have challenging ideas. Patrick Lencioni, in his book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, points out that one of the foundational dysfunctions is lack of conflict. Now, conflict is a triggering word. That sounds terrible, but when you read the book, what he's really referring to is a place, if the place does not allow for contrary opinions to be expressed and debated, if that kind of questioning gets suppressed, that will create dysfunction in the organization. Where communication, good quality communication is enabled, then those opinions can be addressed. And sometimes they turn into great ideas, and sometimes they just need to be heard in order to be dismissed appropriately, to say, yes, we've heard you. Everybody feels heard, and to recognize that it's not a direction to go. Learning and development is enabled and uncovered. Learning and development opportunities is uncovered and enabled through effective communication. So if you're going to be effective in your communication processes, in your interpersonal relationships, whether at work or in family or in community, it starts with empathy, really listening, and you listen so that you convey the intended message of your communication, that there is no fear of punishment, that there will be no blaming or shaming or guilting, that you welcome healthy conflict or debate or discussion, and that honest feedback is truly honest. This also enables the celebration of mistakes, because mistakes turn into learning opportunities. And in a healthy conversation area, a healthy communication area, and in a healthy safe space, then we can be comfortable even in uncomfortable situations. Stephen Covey, in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, identified habit number 5 as seek first to understand and then to be understood. Seek first to understand and then to be understood. And probably most of you have heard that before, but have you ever considered what that really means? Now, I would suggest that what's in that box, the for this you need box, are some elements of what it means to seek first to understand. Again, this is one of those things that is also easy to say and hard to do, because we have instinctive communication tendencies and blind spots that can get in the way. That was what that poll list was about at the beginning of this presentation. Now, for example, for me, if I'm not careful, I get a gazillion ideas going in my head as people are talking. If I'm not careful, I will jump in too soon into a conversation or into an idea stream and cut off the other person or people with my idea of what they're talking about or an improvement that I can offer before they finish their idea. I'm a problem solver. I get paid to come in and help businesses solve their problems. But I can be, if I'm not careful, too quick to solve the wrong problem, to solve the first problem that I hear or what I perceive to be the first problem, and answer the question before it's been fully defined. Now, my defense for this, and this is a learned behavior for me, when I jump in or have the instinct to jump in, I stop and I ask a question. I ask a clarifying question. This enables me to get the rest that I need so that I don't jump in and take things over, and it continues to have me engaged in the search for what the root cause is or what the perceived issue is from the person that I'm speaking with. So my question to you, and you might even want to write this down, is do you have a communication habit that you can identify that sometimes gets in the way? Maybe it's a blind spot. If it's blind, you don't even know what it is, but maybe others have pointed this out to you. So communication habits or blind spots that can create communication troubles for you. And I encourage you to write it down or say it out loud. No one else is going to hear you, in order to simply acknowledge it and put it out there. because one or more of the 7 skills that we're going to go into in a moment will probably help you with this. Now, think about a typical communication situation at work, or maybe with your children at home. Someone comes to you with a question or a problem. What's your instinct? What are the triggers going off in your brain? Is it to sit back and reflectively listen and ask some questions? If that's your instinct, you're ahead of me and I study this. Or is it to want to give a solution or advice or counsel? That's more like me. When we do that, we tend to respond to the symptoms and get in too early, and not to get down to the root issue or the emotional challenge or the technical problem at the source of the issue. So we want to be able to peel back the layers, and that is done by asking questions, good questions, and listening to them. What's the outcome? How do you feel when you're in a conversation with someone who is genuinely listening, asking good questions? The outcome is, in my experience, is it tends to lift and strengthen both or all people involved in this communication exchange. So when those brain triggers go for you, whatever that communication habit or blind spot is, then I'll invite you to use one or more of these 7 skills to ask more questions and to listen more deeply. To essentially say, tell me more, and to seek to understand before you seek to be understood. So let's have a look at these skills. These come from a book by Richard Himmer called Listen and Lead, and there's 7 skills for effective communication. So the first one is no unsolicited opinions or advice. And unsolicited is the important word here. There are times where you will be asked specifically for an opinion or advice or an answer, but no unsolicited opinions. Well, what does that mean? We often want to give advice or to solve problems, and sometimes not even aware of when we're giving advice. So things like, you know what you should do? That's advice. Or this is a great idea, but what would make it even better, just 1 or 2% better, which would make all the difference, would be if you did this. Now, there's a time for that advice. There's a time for improving the proposal, but at this point, that's not the time. Those things tend to shut a person down. Also, watch out for opinions and advice that are in disguise. So, have you ever tried? That's a question, but it's really advice. Or have you considered what would happen if you did this or that? That's a question, but it's really advice. So again, what happens when we give advice too early? A couple of things. We shut down the person. And secondly, we may not be answering the right question. Here's a quick example. If you've been to Washington, D.C., you've probably been to the Lincoln Memorial. It's a beautiful white stone structure in the monuments area of the Washington Mall. It was found that the cleaning solutions to clean up the bird mess that was on it was deteriorating the stone. And so the obvious answer to that is change the cleaning solution, right? Wrong. The question is, why are the birds there? And why is the bird mess on the Lincoln Memorial? Well, because there's birds there. Why are the birds there? Because there's bugs there. And the birds tend to be coming at night. So why are the bugs there? Well, because the lights are on. Why are the lights on? Because it's nighttime and there's safety reasons. But do we need the lighting? This was the root problem question. is there something that can be done with the lighting? And the answer was yes. So different types of lighting serve the purpose of illuminating the structure, but not attracting as many bugs. Having the lights on a different schedule, dimming them after 10 o'clock when the monument closes. There were a number of solutions that were made around lighting that meant that they didn't have to clean up as much. The cleaners didn't have to clean up as much. And yes, the cleaning solution was changed, but the root issue was lighting. And so if one jumps to conclusions too soon, we don't get to the right decision. Related to unsolicited opinions is no judging. So we want to respond to people in an attempt to be empathetic, but we want to focus on the feelings or the experience of others and not our own. So someone may tell you a story and your instinct might be to say, wow, that's amazing. And that's probably all right, but those actually are judgments of what you've heard from your perspective. But other places we go, someone tells you about a very difficult, what you perceive to be a difficult situation. Maybe it's the death of a father. And you, in your attempt for empathy, say, oh, that must be very difficult for you and the family. Sounds reasonable, right? But perhaps father had been suffering with cancer for 2 years and that his death is a relief. So yes, it's hard, but it's also a relief. You see, when I say to you, that must be hard, I am imposing on you my emotional experience with the news in an attempt to understand your emotional experience, but I'm imposing this on you. A better question would be, tell me about it. Or how are you feeling? And because those questions enable a person to tell you their experience, not imposing ours. Another really difficult judgment statement that can cause problems is when you hear a story and you go, oh, I know just what you mean. I had the exact same experience. Except you didn't. You had your experience with a similar set of circumstances, or what appears to be a similar set of circumstances, and they had their experience with the circumstances. And even if the circumstances on paper appear to be identical, we didn't have the same experience. We had our unique experiences. And so we want to ask questions instead to help understand their experience, their thinking, their emotion, and engage with them at their level. The third one is no relating. And again, this is, I know just what you mean. I had just had exactly that same experience, or where we take what we hear from somebody and equate it to an experience that we've had recently. And it's an attempt to be empathetic, to find common ground. And when you're around the campfire or sitting at the bar, that's an appropriate way of engaging with people. But in these more intimate relationships of leadership and communication, we want to avoid that connection because it turns the spotlight from the person who is meant to be our focus and puts it back on us. Now, I will confess a horrible example of failure in this situation. Several years ago, you may recall news about Boeing 737 MAX 8 plane crashes. There were 2 of them that happened, tragic accidents with the loss of life, one of them in Indonesia and the other one in Ethiopia, I believe. I was at the cottage, our family cottage, and my 95-year-old aunt was there. She is my aunt by marriage. She married my dad's brother. And she told me, we were sitting chatting, and she brought up the event of the crash in Ethiopia. And she told me at that time that her cousin had been on that plane. He was working for the UN, and he had tragically died in that plane crash. Now, this was a moment where I could have been empathetic. I could have done all of the things that I have just outlined to you in the no judging and especially no relating, and just to allow my Aunt Isabel to express her pain. But only a few days after that plane crash in Ethiopia, but before the fleet of 737s MAX 8s were grounded, I boarded a 737 MAX 8 in Winnipeg to return from Winnipeg to Toronto. And so when she told me the story, I triggered on that story. And without any sense of empathy with her, I said, oh, yeah, I got on a 737 MAX 8 in Winnipeg just after that news. And I told her of my emotion about getting on that plane. She had just told me that her cousin had been killed, and I told an amusing story about my emotions. Now, as soon as it came out of my mouth, I thought in my head, Marie, you're an idiot. You teach this stuff and you just made a terrible mistake. I knew I'd made a mistake because my aunt shut down her communication. And so I put down what I was doing and I went to sit in the chair beside her and I began to ask her about her cousin. And because this was a man that I did not know, came from her side of the family. Fortunately, my relationship with my aunt was strong enough to overcome that terrible mistake that I had made in communication and enabled us to re-engage in this most important discussion for her so that I could help her through that traumatic story and strengthen my relationship with my aunt as a result. The middle one here is to communicate from a neutral position. This is hard. This is hard. What we're talking about here is we all have our own biases, opinions, and beliefs about things that may not align with the person that we're talking to. How do we set aside those bias triggers in order to fully hear and comprehend what another is saying? Now, in some environments, this is almost impossible. We're in the middle of a federal election in Canada, and federal elections are designed to pit one side against the other. And if you believe in one party, everybody else is the enemy and vice versa. So it's very hard to bridge those types of gaps that are designed to not be neutral. But when we're in interpersonal communication with people, we must do our best to hear without judgment, without relating, in order to create a neutral position for us to be able to hear and then at the appropriate time offer advice or solution and perhaps even some judgment in that advice, appropriate judgment in that advice or solution when it is the appropriate time. We want to avoid those blind spots we talked about. Those are our natural instinctive places to go. My instinct is to jump in and answer questions or solve problems before I've heard the full breadth of the issue or done the full investigation. And so we want to avoid those blind spots. We want to, first of all, try to figure out what they are and then avoid falling into those problems. In stressful situations, which often in workplace communications around projects and deadlines, the stress levels are up and those blind spots pop up all the time. So what's the defense there? As it is with all of them, ask questions instead. Ask another question. Instead of falling into your blind spot trap, ask another question. Instead of judging from and applying your biases to something, ask another question. Instead of offering advice right away, ask another question to get to the deeper issue. When you have done all of this and the communication is working very well and there is harmony and unity, you have sought first to understand. Now it is time to share and be understood. And now you can teach. In a crisis situation, you will tell because something has to be done. But if you have the time and the ability, you can use this communication opening to teach and to help. You know, if you think of that young student I was mentioning before who would go to the supervisor to know how to avoid making a mistake the next time, the answer from the supervisor, according to the student, was own it. And essentially the sub-message was figure it out yourself. The supervisor was missing this brilliant opportunity to teach his junior employee. through question and answer, through lessons, to teach and develop the skill set of the junior employee. Think about it with your children. We don't just tell them to own it, usually. We seek opportunities to teach and help them grow to become functioning adults. That's our job as parents. We ought to be doing the same thing with people who report to us, who don't know as much as you do, who don't have the skills and experience that you do. But if you don't teach them, if you don't communicate with them and create these opportunities for teaching and growth, they'll never get there. And you will always be fixing problems that they could fix themselves if they were properly taught. And in teaching, we still ask questions. One of the reasons we ask questions is to get to this last one, which is to get small commitments. People will change and grow, and they will do things if we ask them, when it's reasonable and when it's safe. And so if we've asked questions all the way along to get more information and to get engagement, then when it comes time to ask for a commitment, we're more likely to get that answer. So you've now done your teaching. We could do A or B or C. Here's the outcome we're looking for. You've taught what the outcome is to be and how to get there. Would you be willing to try this? Would you be willing to take this next step? Would you be willing to go to this training program to learn how to do this better? These are all small commitments that are almost no-brainers at this point. Why wouldn't the person say yes to it? And you have now moved them along their journey because you've communicated effectively with them in a safe space for communication. These skills require practice. They require emotional intelligence, and they require awareness to overcome our natural instincts. They come through learning and practice. In the first three skills, we're definitely going to ask questions. In the 4 and 5, we have to suppress our natural inclinations, the neutral position and the blind spots. That takes some real emotional intelligence to know what those natural inclinations are and to be able to appropriately suppress them. And in skill 6 and 7, this is where we have now the ability to grow a person through teaching and small incremental growth through small commitments. This will strengthen your teamwork. It will strengthen your relationship in your business, in your families, in your interpersonal relationships as well. It takes lots of questions, or rather it takes lots of practice. And if you're new to this, it's going to feel weird at first, but it does work. I will give you one piece of warning though. If you go home today and try these new ideas that are exploding in your mind with your spouse or your children, they will instantly get suspicious and they will wonder what happened to you. It's more dangerous to do it at home. Practice at work first and then bring it home. When my call to action for you is to apply one or more of these skills, and we'll do a poll in a moment on these, but pick one or two of these. Don't try to do all 7 at once. The last 2 will become the natural destination of your success in any of the first 5. But pick 1 or 2 that you can identify that you can work on and observe for a while the responses that you receive from people, not just verbal responses, but the physical, the body language, the psychological and relationship responses that grow over time. And I promise you that as you work on these skills for effective communication, not even all 7 at once, but 1 or 2 of them, that you will notice that you are creating safer spaces around you for more intense and intimate communication. You will strengthen relationships around you. And you will watch as you have natural levers now to empower others because you're able to teach them and train them in the opportunities that come up through these communication opportunities. That trust and teamwork and commitment will grow. And you won't be like the captain in Cool Hand Luke saying, what we have here is failure to communicate. You will be celebrating the outcomes of your ability to communicate. What we have here is the excellent outcomes of the 7 skills for effective communication. Well, we're going to finish up here with a final poll, which is also my call to action or for commitment to you, my attempt to get a small commitment that you will apply at least one of these 7 skills today if you can. And if not today, tomorrow. So Melissa, can you put up that last poll? And I think you can only select one. So select one of these 7 skills that you will begin working on today. Okay, that's everybody. So once again, there are no right or wrong answers in this poll, but you can see where the distribution goes. So my small commitment, my small call to you is when you have an opportunity today or between today or tomorrow, deliberately try to practice the idea and the intent of the skill that you have identified. If you have an opportunity to find Richard Himmer's book, Listen and Lead, you might be able to find it on Amazon. My sister-in-law who lives in the United States sent it to me. It's not as easy to get in Canada, but it's I would endorse it. I think it's well worth reading. I will just finish up with a last, hang on. The joys of technology. So practice those skills, those 7 skills. Communicate with your questions, communicate and listen, and watch for these outcomes that will occur of strengthened relationships and greater leadership influence. And this applies as much in business and families and community in any time or place where you have an influence role. It may be a formal leadership role or an informal role, but where you have an influence role or opportunity, these 7 skills will make you a better communicator and a better leader. So that brings us to the end of the formal presentation today. This is the kind of work that I do with companies in strategy and leadership and success. So if you're interested in more information about what Blue Canoe Consulting does, here is my contact information. This slide deck will also be available for distribution if you wish to have it. And if you have some questions, put them in the chat, or Melissa will be able to let you ask it out loud. And Davis Winch likes the movie Cool Hand Luke, so there's another recommendation for you.
Yeah, if you have any questions, you can raise your hand and I can unmute you, or you can put it in the chat.
Thanks for your comment, Caroline. Thanks, Lynn. Mary Jane has a question.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can. Go ahead, Mary Jane.
Great presentation.
Thanks.
I've been thinking so much about how to talk with a friend who does not believe in vaccination. And I think I'm going to need every single one of these.
And more, and lots of patience.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's anywhere to go with it except just to try to be a good ear. Like it just is deeply entrenched. I don't think changing an opinion is going to be possible.
Yes, and sorry, I'm jumping. See, I'm making my own mistake. I'm jumping in here. Did you have other questions on that or an observation?
I can't think of a question except thank you. Thank you for all these suggestions on how to approach the conversation.
So this, I use politics because it was a little bit more neutral in my commentary today, but the vaccine pro con debate is another example of one where we moved into tribes, right? There is a great divide. And so on the debate on the issue of vaccine, you're probably not going to be able to move at all. But you have a relationship with this person already. And so that's the foundation of your discussion. And maybe in the end, you agree to still love each other, but disagree.
Yeah, I think that's the best outcome probably that's possible. Thank you.
You're welcome. In a work setting, there's a common goal usually, which is to get to a solution. In a family setting with spouse or children, hopefully there's a common goal to get to a solution. In these really polarized debates like vaccine or some of the political debate, there isn't a desire to get to a common ground. It's my side versus your side, and that is a hard one to bridge.
Yeah, good point. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for your comment, Maggie. Cheryl is asking, how do you recommend practicing these skills? It's a great question, and it's awareness. So that story that I told you about my aunt was me practicing the skill. I know what these skills are. I teach them. I review them regularly, and I still make the mistakes. In fact, at home, my kids are now grown and out of the house. They used to say to me, "Dad, don't do that work stuff on us." And they could see right through me. But we do it by deciding that we're going to do it. So if you've selected the skill of, say, no judging because you find yourself trying to impose, or with all of the best of intention, imposing a judgment on information that you hear, then next time it comes up and you put a judgment on it and you catch yourself putting a judgment on it, step back and ask a different question. Just pretend you never said it and then ask a question that turns the experience back to the person who's expressing it to you. So that would be my answer, Cheryl. You'll trip, but with this awareness, so if you're thinking about one of these skills that you've identified, yes, you can. Cheryl's asking, do you acknowledge what you've done? Yes, often it's appropriate to say, "Oh, I'm sorry. I just made a conclusion, or I just expressed my idea, but what's yours? Tell me more." That's quite appropriate. Does that help, Cheryl? Yeah, I'm following the chat. Many of you may have the chat on, but Cheryl's observing, yes, when we acknowledge our errors and then change the direction more appropriately, it seems more genuine too. Vulnerability is one of the keys to creating safe spaces. If you admit your vulnerability or an error or an imperfection, then it makes it safer for other people to admit mistakes or bring up questions when the perception might be, "Well, I'm supposed to know this, but I don't. Is it safe to bring it up?" Well, if you occasionally bring up some of your errors and growth, that's the other side of it, your growth side of it, you create safe spaces. Yeah, Bob Foster, you have stressed asking questions, no argument, but it also takes not just listening, but real listening. Okay, Bob, I'm glad you brought this up because you're right. The destination we're trying to get to is this real listening. So these 7 skills, If you view them as some sort of magic technique and you apply them as techniques, you will quickly be shown as a fraud. People will see through that if it's technique only. But if you apply them to deepen and increase your skill to really genuinely listen, to seek first to understand before you are understood, then they will become part of your operating character, your natural repertoire, and will enhance your ability to truly listen. So Bob, I'm glad you brought this up. I don't want people to think these are magic techniques. These are tools to deliberately practice to develop a skill whose destination is to really listen to people. Great question or observation, Bob. Any other questions or thoughts? Okay, Melissa, it looks like we've reached the top of the hour and the designated time limit. I'm happy if any of you want to send me an email or a phone call, or you'll get the slide deck, and a month from now, get in touch with me if you like. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate sharing these ideas with you, and I wish you every success in applying one or more of these 7 skills to develop, as Bob has pointed out, a genuine ability to really listen to people.
Thank you so much, Murray, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning. And I hope you guys have a good long weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good day, everyone. Thank you.